So I'm just going to jump in. We're going to go over a few things, and then we're going to get hands-on. Like I've got some stuff to show you. I would love for you guys to follow along. If when we get hands-on, and in the interests of that, I'm actually going to kill my, whoop, I am hitting all of the wrong buttons. I also don't usually work with this screen resolution. I went big so that it wouldn't throw everybody off. Wow, down. I'm just hoping for the direct link that I can just drop in here. Just so you know that you did not find the stupid, illegitimate link or something like that. This is the real one. I closed Slack so that I don't have any alerts popping up while I'm presenting. Otherwise, I'd drop it in there. But if you want to follow along, when we get to the hands-on part, go ahead and get Postman downloading if you haven't already. It is free. There are paid things that you can do with it. You don't need any of them for 99% of what most people do with Postman. I have never actually needed to pay for it. So there's some collaboration stuff that's nice, but we're not even going to touch on that today. So, all right, well, not much. So before we really test with an API, you got to think about what an API is. And we're going to go really brief here over kind of the architecture of the API, or relatively brief. And by the way, tangent, and Jeff knows I am awful with tangents, please jump in. Like, I'm serious, unmute and interrupt me if you have a question. I am more than happy for that. I would much rather be answering questions than just talking for the duration of this. I mean, granted, we'll have time for whatever questions you've got later, but in the minute, if you got something, hit me up. So what's an API? Application programming interface doesn't really help much. But if you think about it as something that goes between the client, whoever it is that's using something, and what they want, that's when that's when you can start to visualize how it works. So for me, recently I started liking the analogy of an automated warehouse, where you've got somebody who's got their iPad or their computer or whatever, and they know what they want. They know the item they want, bin number, barcode, whatever, and they punch it in, and a little robot goes and it gets it. So I kind of liked that imagery. You've got the person who wants something, but there's something is somewhere lost in the stacks of a warehouse. And the API is what manages getting that. It's kind of the middleman. So an API is going to do a few things. So it takes requests. You have to ask generally, you have to ask the API for what you want. And the API is going to accept that request and check your authentication. It's going to say, can I even do that? Before I even care whether you're allowed to do something, is that something that I even do? If you go to an API and you ask it to make you a sandwich, it's probably going to say no. It has no clue. Although there is a response code, I'm a teapot. I love that made it into the official documentation. Somebody was goofing off, but hey, it's going to say, can I do it? And then it's going to say, hey, are you allowed to do that thing? Are you authenticated? Like, do you have the right tokens? Do you have the right username, password, whatever, however the API happens to authenticate, are you allowed to do it? And then once it knows that you are asking for something that exists and you are allowed to do the thing, it'll go ahead and start working on it. But working on it can be triggering an action or returning information or both, right? Like APIs are pretty flexible, generally speaking. We're going to talk about REST APIs specifically. There are other tools to test APIs. Postman, or other forms of APIs, I should say, like socket APIs, stuff like that. Postman's not one of them. Stick to REST APIs with Postman. And a REST API is literally just going to sit there doing nothing except listen until you ask it for something. You ask it, it'll take the action, and then it'll sit again and just wait for more requests. And like I said, it's the most, well, like I said, it's the one that we're going to do for Postman, but it's also the most common for information sharing. Like if you are accessing a website, e-commerce page, whatever, it's probably going to be a REST API until you're doing live interaction. And I mean live as in like video quality or lots of information going back and forth. You know, video games, movie streaming, creative software is often going to use something like a socket API. So,
AJ, I got a question.
Yeah.
All right. So,
hey, Andy. Sorry,
hey,
been a while.
Hey, nice to see you. Totally. I was taught that that basically the API is in between the UI and the database. And it seems like that's kind of an oversimplification, because it sounds like the API might not be getting something from a database. It could be getting it from, where else could it be getting it from, I guess is my question.
No, that's a great question. And generally speaking, I mean, the most common, like the textbook definition is that, yes, it sits between the UI and a database. That's kind of the classic, I guess. But pretty regular, like, well, APIs can sit between anything. Like, and they're kind of information movers. So sometimes they'll sit between, or you'll make a request from a UI and it will actually go through 2 or 3 different APIs before you actually get something back. So they can spaghetti out and do all kinds of things, but UI to database is kind of the textbook version. So
cool, thanks.
Yeah. And they're also, they tend to be for a lot of applications. Let's see, there's the whole, it's always changing. It used to be everybody wanted monolithic software, but then everybody wanted microservices. Now people are talking about not wanting microservices, you know, whatever. There's pretty often one application will be hitting, you know, 12, 24 different APIs that do all kinds of different things. So it's not like a one-to-one relationship.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. So an API. When it comes to actually using an API, there's a little bit of anatomy to know. You've got your base URL, you've got one or more endpoints, and you've got some different request types you can use, and you've got some different parameters that you can use. So I liked the automated warehouse idea, so I just grabbed Wally so we can kind of keep that metaphor going. I don't think I beat it to death. You can disagree with me if you want to, but I guess I'm the one presenting. So base URL. That's, you know, your little robot wants to know which warehouse it's even going into in the first place. Like this is literally the URL. Here, I'm going to actually jump out of the slide deck really quick and just show you. Just so if you hit Amazon, and it would help if I spelled it correctly, whatever. All right. So my keyboard's right behind my microphone. And there we go. I was eating at my desk, so let's push back. Now we're better. So Amazon.com, that is literally an endpoint, a base URL and an endpoint. It's both. And I'll show you what I mean. So somebody give me something to search for. Some relatively safe, please.
Dogs.
Okay. So if you check it out right here, we've got Amazon.com as our base URL. And then we're going to keep talking about this here in a minute, but /s is their search endpoint, and k equals dogs. Like that's the query string parameter for the thing you want to search for. Let's change that to cheese. See, it even updated in the UI here. This is the search page for cheese. You know, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do. So when I say a base URL, it's literally a URL like you're thinking about. Now, it might be formatted as an IP address or, you know, localhost port 8080 or, you know, something like that. Like it might not be a www dot kind of thing, but it is going to be a standard URL structure. Pretty frequently an application that uses like that it's not the front end API, there's going to be something like a /API or /WS for web server, something like that in there. I totally should have looked for Master Chief. I'm just now seeing those messages. But hey, all right. So there's going to be some kind of identifier sometimes, but it really is just a basic URL. And that's going to tell Wally where he needs to go, what warehouse he needs to end up in. Well, he's in a warehouse. What shelf, what room, what area, whatever. Like, how does he navigate? And if you've ever been to an IKEA, you know that this can be a problem sometimes if you don't have your information correct. Or tried to use some of the, find in stores on apps, like find in Lowe's, and it's on the back wall, and back wall is not spelled out in there. Back wall, it's some weird letter code that I've never heard of. But hey, it works because everybody knows, or if you talk to an employee, they know what's going on. Wally knows where everything is based on these endpoints. And it's going to be kind of that tail end of the structure. So on that Amazon search, it was just /s or just s. Kind of depends on how things are coded. It's all semantics, doesn't really matter. It was the S endpoint. Foo/bar could be an endpoint. We've got multi-part directions here, like /people/for/contacts/whatever. Like it can be long and ugly. Like if you've ever tried to share a link to something like a Google search result or like if you click into an Amazon item and you just quick copy and paste the URL, that thing is massive because they've put all kinds of information into the URL. But for us, we want to know about it because we need to know the directions to find what we need, what we want. Now I used this example /people /a number /contacts. Like I used that because one of the applications that my client is having me help test right now is kind of a contact database, contact information database, permissions, all sorts of things. We need to be able to hit a web service with an identifying number for a person and get back a boatload of information about that person, what their roles are, what applications they should have access to based on their roles. I mean, there's a few different API calls that go on, but there's a lot of identifying numbers that just end up there in the middle of the URL. So that's another thing we're going to talk about here in a bit. But you've got your different request types. And like I mentioned here, this is not a hard and fast rule. But you need to know, or rather, the API wants to know what you want to do with that address you just gave it. What's Wally going to do when he shows up? Is he going to just pull something off the shelf? Is he getting something? Is he putting something new there, posting something? Is he changing what's there or putting something there? I don't know why they couldn't just say edit, but put is the request type there, and delete. Those are kind of the big four. There's a few others, but and even then, it's not hard and fast because your developers can code however the heck they want. This is just the standard. You can have your code written that delete returns a record and get deletes a record. It depends, but this is usually how it's going to fly. Okay. So we know where we're going. We know what we're doing. Is there anything extra? And that's where our parameters come in. Generally, you've got your query string parameters, your endpoint parameters, your headers, and your body. And now I know this is where your eyes start to glaze over because so far this does not mean anything to you, not unless you've had experience with this yet. And we will get into each one of these. Now you've heard of them. So maybe it'll kind of fit in that this fits in as just extra information for an existing request. Now, this is where the analogy breaks down a little bit too, because headers can be authentication. Headers can also be information that tweaks how a request happens. Like there can be kind of a lot going on. So we'll talk about these as we go. But once you've got all that in there, you hit submit, your request goes, and you have to sit and wait for a response. Now, if you've got a fast API, you might only be waiting a couple 100 milliseconds. If you've got a fast API, but it's a big request, you might be waiting a few. If it's an API that doesn't get used a ton, depending on how the software works. I can't remember if Jeff was there when I made a Harry Potter fanfic API. Yeah, that thing was so freaking slow because it had a Heroku database on the other side, on the free tier. And if nobody had hit it for like a day, it would shut down. And so you'd hit the request, have to wait 45 seconds for the server to turn on. So there you go. But usually you want this to be fast. So that's actually going to be something that you should keep an eye on when you're testing an API. But doing all of that stuff, using all of that in Postman, because Postman's really what we wanted to talk about. We're 20 minutes in. So really, check this out. I'm not even kidding. I'm going to give you the short and sweet, version here, but hit this website, hit those docs up, because they've got a lot more information and it's organized really well. But I also fully recognize that if you don't understand the basics of something, it is a pain to learn from documentation. So we are going to pick this up. We're going to get a hands-on with Swappy. So the Star Wars API. No guarantees that the data is accurate, and the original API actually is no longer maintained. So we're using the second Swappy that has Force Awakens information, but that is literally what it said. It has Force Awakens information. I'm like, we've had a couple more movies since then. So I don't know if they're in there or not. I haven't looked, but hey. So we're going to do this. We're going to get hands-on. I'm going to show you some basic API documentation, because odds are good when you ask your developers, hey, I want to get in here. I want to test our API, or they ask you and say, can you yet? They're probably going to give you some documentation, something like these. They might, if you're lucky, and I already knew how to do it, but I was also really lucky. I had my lead dev send me a file that I imported straight into Postman with about 50 different requests, environment variables all set up for me. It was a beautiful thing. I did tweak a few things that, because he and I are organizationally minded differently, but it was a lot better than starting from scratch. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about creating a collection, running some queries. We'll see how time goes, get into pulling from dev tools, stuff like that. But we're going to focus on the basics first, and I'll answer any questions you guys have on those. I have an extra slide. Okay. I was trying to make sure I didn't forget anything, and I didn't. So, all right. Moving right in here. Let's take a look first at Swappy's documentation. Now, Swappy is the one that we are going to use. Now, these are actually the two that I used teaching people in Dev Mountain, Marvel's API and Swappy API. Well, that's redundant, but hey. It's better if you can get a real API, but most people don't have APIs that respond really well to get or puts and posts and like actually update information and stuff like that, sitting up there just waiting for any random person on the internet to use it. It's a good way for your database or your service at least to crash. So if you get the chance, please try and play with this with a legit app, or even download a simple application and run it on your machine. Like, it'll be a good experience to get more than just the gets that this will let you run. But that said, it's a great place to get started. So Swappy is kind of the, your developer realized they didn't have documentation. They didn't have anything set up to have documentation. And so they threw something together for you over a couple of hours. Like, that's kind of the level of API documentation we've got here. Okay. If we click over to documentation, go figure. So you can see here, we've got, it's organized as a single really long page, which I don't really like. I'm like, come on, a markdown with Bitbucket, you could do better than this, but hey, it works. It gets the job done. So getting started, make our first request. Okay, you can ignore the vast majority of this stuff because they show you how to do requests like with the terminal. I'm like, nobody uses the terminal to do requests. So, or hardly anybody. I shouldn't say nobody. There's somebody out there doing it. But for us, we're going to use Postman. And so we're going to do this a little differently. And you get to see my whole screen now because I'm going to start swapping windows, and that's kind of a hassle when I'm sharing window at a time. But if I do need to change zoom or resolution on anything, let me know. I had a student who was colorblind and didn't let me know for 2 or 3 weeks that they couldn't read the error messages on my screen. I'm like, accessibility, you talked about that last month. I should have known better. But yeah, so I use colorblind mode from then on, but I did not vet this first, so let me know. Okay, so this is Postman. Now, this isn't exactly what it's going to look like when you first load in, because I've already got a workspace and a collection set up. I've got a couple of workspaces in here. I literally just have this one that I was playing with, and my workspace. But we'll stick on this one, so I'm not sharing any proprietary information. But I've already got a collection set up, and a bunch of stuff that I'll show you. But let's first do a simple query. You see that I just hit this add right here. You can hit a plus over here. Like I'm already in a collection. If you hit new, it gives you a bunch of things that you can create. So you can hit new and then do a new HTTP request. Ooh, hold on. Cool. Looks like they're going to be doing sockets. I did not know that. So that's in beta, I guess. So something new. Okay. Now there's this first request here to the Star Wars 8 API that they recommend. Now, this is a terminal command, like HTTP is hitting that protocol, that app, and then hitting the rest of the API, or hitting the rest of the base URL and endpoint. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in, hit enter, and there we go. That was a long wait for them. 2.5 seconds. Usually it comes back faster, but I swear everything runs slower when you're sharing your screen. So must be what it is. But there we go. We've got Tatooine back. So Tatooine in Swappy's database is planet number 1, right? So we've got our first API request going on there. And right now, we don't really know what the endpoints are. We don't know what the base URLs are because these documentations are kind of rough. Here we go. Base URL, swappy.dev/API. So there's your base URL. So if I want to make my own request using Postman, like not copy and paste the request somebody else formatted for me, you start with the base URL for the API. And then you want to figure out what endpoint you're going to go for. So what's kind of interesting, and you can dig through the docs to find all of this stuff. I'm not gonna make you read through documentation with me, but they actually set it up so that if you hit just the base URL, you at least get back a list of like the next tier of items. You get the next endpoints in there. So you got people, planets, films, species, vehicles, starships. Something else that's nice about Postman, if you can see, it says, well, I'm sharing, and let me zoom a little bit, and I will also full screen that. Okay, so if oh, come on, where did it go? It's hiding. Let's try sending it again. I'm going to minimize this. Okay. Man, I swear, sometimes they like to hide their information, and I don't know how making my screen full size totally hid that section. Yay for a hiccup. Sorry, guys. Yeah, let me just do this. Let me change this into a 2-pane view because I know that works. Okay, there's probably, this was hiding behind a sticky note in the corner of my screen. Yes, I have it. No, it does not have any passwords on it. But what's kind of nice here is if I control click, it will follow the link. It's not always smart enough to open that link in Postman, but you can also copy and paste it. So open up a new request. It's people is not going to work. That is not a valid request. There we go. That's a valid URL. Now, you might have noticed it opened this URL here in the browser. Every browser request is a GET request. Like anytime you open anything in the browser, it's a GET request, believe it or not. Okay, so now I hit the people endpoint and I get back a whole long list of people. And it's JSON format. And like we got Luke Skywalker here, C3PO. This is also something that's pretty nice. If you hit this pretty right here, you get your results in a way that you can expand and collapse, so you can sometimes find it a little bit easier. If you got a website back, it thinks I'm a bot because I'm hitting it through Postman. But preview here gives you what it would look like in your browser. Raw is just straight up text, no formatting that they didn't give you already. So there's a few different ways to do it. I pretty much always stick with pretty, as it's prettier. All right. So we got a few things to do here, but we've done our basic GET request. Now I wanted to show you a few things here. I was going to show you these four in particular. We had our basic GET request. Now this gets the first person instead of the first planet. So it should come back with Luke Skywalker. There we go. So if you remember, we talked about a few different kinds of parameters that could go in here. One of them was a query string parameter, which we'll get to in a minute. There was also an endpoint parameter. And that's when they start pulling information out of the URL, out of the endpoints. Because you can literally, on a lot of places, a lot of pages, it won't work in here, but like /films to access his films, hypothetically, that number one there though, that number one is our endpoint parameter. It's what is telling our API, okay, hit the people endpoint. Now under the people endpoint, hit the number one endpoint or hit the number two endpoint and then go from there. So when we've got information that can change like this, especially if you've got several different keys in here that can change, that's when we want to start using parameters through Postman. Now, Postman does this pretty readily. Here, let's get out of here. Oh, no, I did want people. And now you get the answer already here from autocomplete. Now, this is something I made up, so it does not have to be anything in particular. But you can see here, they call them path variables, endpoint parameters, same thing. Honestly, I don't know which one's official, but they both get referred to that way. So hey, path variables, whatever. It's got the key right here, and what's kind of nice, I'm just going to go with person ID because I like naming things in a way that makes sense. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to put in value 1. And when I send this request, it dynamically replaces this key right here with whatever value I had right there. So, maybe you have like person ID, film ID, and some other stuff, whatever. You can go layers deep with this if you want to. But for us, we've got the 1, and that's parameterizing the endpoint here. I'm going to export this collection, by the way, just so you have a few examples of it working, so you can see. Yeah, path variable, perfect. Well, query string parameters are the other variables. Yes, that's absolutely it. I have no idea if you can see the chat window when I open it. I have not shared on Zoom in forever. I just saw Carlos was making a comment, and that's right over here. We're going to get into those query string parameters over there too. So yeah, variable that if it's in here, like you said, question mark, and then something equals something else, that's a query string parameter. So there's a couple of different ways to put things here just in the URL. Something else that can be really nice when you're like, let's say you've got 50 different requests in here or more, and you really don't want to have to copy and paste or type. Well, this isn't horrible to type, but some URLs, some base URLs are really long, or they've got a couple of moving pieces and you don't want to have to remember them. Well, enter environment variables, or I mean, how many of us have, your local environment, a test environment, a staging environment, and then production, or whatever, some combination thereof. Environment variables are great. And you can have environments up here. They live up in this corner. Test mock should have been deleted because I was just goofing around with something earlier. Oh, well. So if I hit this little I here, it's going to show me everything that I have in my live environment. I only have the one variable, and its initial value and current value. Now, this is so you can keep track of old versions and stuff like that. I don't like that method of versioning, but it's how Postman does it. So I can have the swappy base URL corroborate to base URL right here. And so I can change out my request. Like these two requests are the same exact thing, because base URL right there is swappy.dev/API. Now let's say I'm going to, there we go. No environment, then add the environment. Let's say I want a test environment where base URL is something else. Oop, without the enter character. All right. So I've got now my live environment and my test environment here. So I can come in, and right now, no environment, base URL, so Postman has no idea what it is. Live, okay, it's swappy. Like I can hit send and I can get my request back eventually. But if I change it to test, now it's something else.com, which is not going to resolve. Apparently something else.com is actually a website. That's kind of awesome. But it gave me a 404 not found. So there you go. Like that's an environment variable that can make it kind of easy. That is a Postman only thing. That's not, well, I shouldn't say that. That is a tool-based thing. It's not an API thing. It's a tool-based thing that's handy to use. The last of the major go-tos for making life easier with the queries directly is the query string parameter, or query params right here in Postman. Now, I skipped around a little bit here. I was going to show you, we've got our docs here, and I'm going to scroll up, and we've got our different documentation for how to do a request to people, or films, or starships, all these different, they call them resources, you can call them endpoints. And then they've got a couple of other things. One of them that's a little bit hidden is Wookie. It tells you can get any data back. The encoding for the data that you get back from Swappy are JSON format. That's the standard. That's what we got back right here, JSON format. It even says it right here, JSON. The other format that you can get back, now this is kind of, I mean, it's not real, obviously. I hope you know that. I hope I shouldn't have had to say that, but I did. So we've got Wookie format. And like it says here, identical to JSON, except with Wookie translations. So literally, if you use format equals Wookie as a query string parameter, so we're going to come over here, and I'll just show you, I'll just add it here. Question mark format equals Wookie. Then it's going to come in, translate it into Wookie. So we've even got it showing up over here, just like we did with our path variable. What's a little bit different though is you see this checkbox. If I uncheck that, you should be able to see up here in the URL, it dynamically adds or removes it, but it doesn't delete it. It knows that there's a format key for the query string parameter, or a query string parameter called format. Good grief, I'm tripping over my tongue tonight. and it will save it for our later use, because sometimes you want to read it in Wookiee, sometimes you don't. So we've got some really basic Postman use. We've got a cut and dried request. Let me close all of these so it gets rid of my deletions, or my edits, excuse me, deletions. Here we go, our basic get request. We've got with a parameter in here, variable for the path. You've got your environment variable. And then we've got an additional query string parameter. Now, if you dig a little bit deeper, there's another one for searching where you can hit a base and you can search for something. Like, I don't know which number in the database R2D2 is, but I want to find him. So there's a query string parameter search. You can just hit that and I get back R2D2's record. So there's a few different ways to already be using Postman. And you just get into more. Post, put, delete. I mean, I told you there's a bunch of other ones too. All sorts of different ways that you can be hitting your endpoints with all kinds of different information. Translate products to Wookiee. That would be epic. Now, I do wonder though if there's a Wookiee dictionary, Wookiee to English dictionary like there is for Klingon. So let's see. Okay, so I've got the basics of Postman there, and I've got another set of docs that I can show you over here with Marvel. They use like some Swagger formatted API docs. Might mean something to you, might not. Swagger, it makes things a little bit easier to navigate, but I can show that to you. But I want to make sure I'm not just talking your ears off. Any questions for me before we take a look there? Or anything you want to see over in Postman? Okay. Oh, somebody in chat. The base URL setup. Absolutely, I can do that, Edgar. All right, so we've got, now, there's a couple of things that you'll want to have before you look, or before you necessarily set up for a base URL. Just because if you've got a base URL, or I mean, a base URL, an environment variable, if you have an environment variable, you're probably going to be saving your requests. You're probably not just doing quick one-offs like, hey, I'm going to copy and paste something and see what I get back. So you're going to want a collection first. Now I'm going to come over here and I'll just say, I'm going to create a new collection. Empty collection. So you can see over here, it's kind of a file explorer format, and this collection is empty. Add a request, start working. All right, so I'm going to do that. We will get person 2, but I already know. Now, I already know that I have the base URL in here, in my environments up here, but we're kind of operating under the assumption that you don't have one set up, right? So it's going to look like this. It's going to say no environment. So you're going to hit this eyeball. There might be a much easier way to do this, and there sure is. You just hit new and then environment. This is what happens when I learned on a really old version of Postman and got stuck on old habits. So hit new and environment, and you've got your brand new environment here to set up. So I'm just going to say some environment, and we'll name this variable Steve, and we're going to put the base URL for Swappy in here. Swappy.dev/API. So generally speaking, I highly, highly recommend that you name your variables, parameters, whatever. You name them things that make sense to you when you're going to come back and look at it. Because why the heck am I, if I had this in some collection that I didn't need to touch for 6 months, I might have no idea that I was just goofing around and that's the base URL. I just want to show you, it really doesn't matter, just like naming a variable. So I hit save up here and I'm done. In my some environment, well, here, we'll say presentation. I'll just name it because the environment is going to get a little awkward to say. So my presentation environment here, I have Steve saved. So I've got my new collection, or I've got my new query in my new collection. And then I can come up here and I can pick my new environment. So there's a few steps to make it work really well, but then I can use it. And it's double bracket formatting. And you can just say Steve, and it'll do some type ahead. E for environment variable, there's the values. There we go, Steve slash, what is it? Let's go start. Oh, I said person 2 up there. Is it person or people? I might be remembering wrong. We'll find out. I was remembering wrong. Get person 2 from the people endpoint. And there you go. So we've got, you can set up all kinds of things here. You know, like sometimes people might have, even in one API, there might be a test or a staging API. And so where we had in here that slash API right there, some people might even have like base test live. And so they set it up something like this. And I don't, what base was this? Come on. So if they really want to save their requests differently, they might go Steve test. And you know, this one's not going to work for us right now because that's not a real thing. And it doesn't like how we were using these slashes. Oh, and I renamed it to base. That's what I get for trying to be efficient. Okay. But if I go to 8 or I call it live. Man, I'm tripping myself up. API, I did call it API. Okay. Yeah. I did something wonky in here. But anyway, people will stack these endpoints. I don't recommend it. Keep it simple. Just keep your base URL in there. And here. That should work. Slash API. Oh, I know what I did. I made a rookie mistake here. I did have it set up right. Initial value, current value. I told you I did not like how Swappy does their stuff here. How Swappy does their versioning on initial and current. Like, I don't know why I need both unless I'm going to test it really quick. There we go. So now, and once again, it's letting me down. Okay. It just doesn't like, oh, live. Holy moly. I'm now at this point, I'm confusing you more than I'm helping you. But let me show you. Base swappy.dev is right here. That's what that resolves into. Live resolves into slash API. So we do end up with the same thing, but you've added a lot of complexity and places to break. But you can use these variables a lot of different ways. Like, let's say that you've just got basic authentication, just a username and a password, but you don't want to have to type in the username and password into every request. You can create an environment variable. You can actually even create that in your collection here. You can add that straight into the collection. All of these requests use that. There's all sorts of things, and we don't have anywhere near enough time to show all of the things that you can do in here. So hopefully that helped, Edgar. What other questions do you guys have?
How would you enter a token?
Token. Okay. You're not the only one with that question.
Yeah, my team had it this week. It seems tricky.
So tokens, they can be tricky. They're also not as hard as you would think. Now, if you are being asked to go out and get the token and automatically bring it in, if you're being asked to like hit an endpoint, like write a script or something, that's above and beyond what I'm going to be able to show you really quick. But you can do some pre-request scripting that'll go and request a token from another endpoint and automatically insert it into your request. But if you've got like a test token or something that's good for an hour and you don't want to have to worry about scripting, whatever, you can come right in here to auth, and there's the bearer token right there. You literally just paste it in there. So now there's another spot that you can come in here and look sometimes too, right here. If you have stuff that's calculated, or that you can come to put stuff in, if there's some weird authentication that's not supported over here, or like for me, my app uses basic authentication, but the way that some of our stuff was coded, it was actually easier for me to find a hashed username and password than it was to find the original username and password. I just came in here and I had no auth, and under headers, there's an authentication or authorization header, and you could just seriously put it in there. See, key authorization value is bearer space and then the token. Like, so for me, I was able to put in, here we go. I can't spell to save my life, so I'll do that. Like basic, and then whatever the hashed key was. So there's a couple, it did not autocomplete. Okay, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it, but you can put it straight in the header if you need to, or if there's some reason you need to edit headers, they're right there. And they work just like the query string parameters that you can check and uncheck them. But the bar none, the easiest way, if you already have the token, drop it right there. So
super easy.
Yeah, it's surprisingly easy. And since we've had a couple questions on the collections here, here we go. If I come over here to my collection and I hit edit, where did this go? Variables, nope, authorization. I was on the right spot. Okay. If I hit edit right here, I can edit my authorization to bearer token. We'll just throw whatever random stuff in there we want. And now if I come back down here and I say, okay, authorization, inherit auth from parent. I probably need to hit save when I edit my collection there. I forgot to hit save. There we go, save. So back in my collection, I hit edit and I changed it to bearer token, put it in and hit save. Inherit automatically. This request is using bearer token from collection. It even tells you the collection in case you didn't know where you opened it from. And there it is right there. So if you have 100 queries in your collection and you only need one bearer token, especially if you're going to go copy and paste it every hour, that makes it a whole lot easier for you to manage. Just put it in the collection and have your requests inherited. So it's actually one of the big things that I changed from the requests that my developer gave me. So, okay. Well, any other questions, you guys? And ladies? And let's see. Okay. So hopefully we got a few minutes left. I'm not to bore you, so I'm going to recommend this here really quick. Hopefully you learned a bit and you have a chance to come and play with Marvel's API. It's going to be a lot more challenging because you actually have to get an API key. You have to follow some instructions on how to use it. But this is a Swagger doc. It shows you all of these endpoints, the endpoint variables, and then if you click into this, this is how it should be returning things to you. But if I scroll down, there's a lot of information you can get back here. If I keep scrolling, all of these query string parameters that you can use on almost every single query in here. So it can help you to really up your game and practice with some more complexity, but it's more complex, yes, but their documentation is also a lot easier to find the endpoints and what the variables are and whatnot. So this would be like a really good next step for you. Okay, last question here. Let's see, we've got new collections, new workspaces, and how to share the collection. So got a few more minutes, so I'll show you those things really quick.
I have one more question.
Okay, we'll go
Yeah,
collection stuff, and then I'll grab yours. What was your question now?
Yeah, so do you have any plans to, in the next session, to show more about the test part and how will...
Well, tests are great because you can script tests in here. But I also didn't want to get too deep into that for the manual presentation unless there's a need for that. That's a whole can of worms by itself. I mean, it's not awful. You can just get a lot of snippets, like it will automatically check, is it responding 200 okay? You know, stuff like that. But beyond that, it can add some complexity. So I'm going to, that's something that maybe we can share, but we can talk about that for between sessions. Now, as far as the collections go, and sorry, I ended up doing those in reverse order, but I don't know. I tend to create collections for different APIs. My APIs might share the same base URL across multiple endpoints, like multiple web services even, or APIs. But even so, if it's a completely, like if it's a separate service, I will usually create a separate collection. And then under my collection, I will usually put in here folders and sometimes multiple nested folders to actually store all of my requests and keep them organized based on their endpoints. You can even come up here and import things from like Swagger, Swagger API, you can copy and paste, and it'll even build new collections for you. It's pretty nice. Like there's lots of complexity you can get into, but collections I'll usually stick to one per API or web service, however you want to phrase that. And then as far as sharing them goes, it's a piece of cake. You hit that triple dot menu and then you export. And it exports it to a JSON file. You just share that JSON file to somebody else. They can import it and you're good to go. Just right here where I said import it as a file or copy and paste the JSON and you're good to go. Same with the environments. You can export those the same way. And then team work or workspaces, that's where workspaces are nice. You can create a workspace. This is paid generally. There might be a way to get in for free, but you can open that up and invite more people to your team workspace. And then anytime anybody's in here, they're going to see all of the collections, all of the environments that already exist there. So you don't have to worry about exporting and importing. So awesome. Well, I believe that is time. So I appreciate your time, and I'll drop my email address and a copy of the slides, not that there's a ton, and a copy of this collection. I'll drop those into the Slack here in a bit, but yeah, hit me if you need anything, have any further questions. And once again, thanks for having me in and talking about APIs.